I'm pleased to present to you today somebody you've seen before, Eric Barrett, the Ag and Natural Resource Educator in Mahoning County, and he's also the area leader for up in the counties in that area. Eric does a great job working with fruit and vegetable production, direct marketing programs, and he's very involved in the horticulture program and horticulture industry. Eric also has a very active certified volunteer naturalist program, and as you've seen him teach before, it's obvious he has won several teaching awards. He's an outstanding teacher. Eric has a beautiful wife and two lovely children, Clara and 4-week-old Stella, because if you were here the last time he spoke, he was anxiously awaiting Stella's birth. So Eric, welcome to Stella, and we'll turn this over to you for Garden Myths and Legends.
Excellent. Thanks, Pam. Appreciate the invitation, and hopefully we'll have lots of things for you all to learn as Master Gardener volunteers that you can help us combat some of these myths and legends we hear. I keep thinking I'm making some inroads with this, and then I get a Master Gardener stands up at a meeting and says, well, I heard, and then we have to remind ourselves of what these things are, and that social media is not the do-all, end-all when it comes to this. Okay, so I will share my screen here, and away we go. So which ones really work? What can we really trust these days? That becomes quite a challenge when it comes to gardening because there's so many things out there and so many sources. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is miracle cures. I feel like that's what we hear about all the time. I heard, or the internet says, my neighbor grows great plants, and he says this stuff. I hear it repels pests, it kills bugs, it increases fruit production, prevents weed, it aerates clay soil. Don't we all wish? Prevents disease, is 100% organic, which we'll get to in a minute. Adds essential nutrients, attracts the good insects. Well, they're not all true. Are they results, or is a lot of it entertainment? I feel like a lot of times it's fun to kind of just chat about these, about what works. And that's good. We still have a lot of places we need to do some research on some more practices that are maybe more earth-friendly in certain areas. But we need to think about what actually does work, what is research-based. So this is one of the websites I pull up. I love checking out some of these things that are online that are definitely not something we should be doing or mixing. Could be harmful to us or our children. And this is from the site. Some people have used chocolate-flavored X-Lax to keep chipmunks and moles from destroying their gardens. Notice that it says some people. It doesn't say research says. You have to watch a lot of these sites and what they say on here, because when it comes to chocolate-flavored X-Lax, if a child gets a hold of that or a pet, they can get deathly ill. It can dehydrate them. So really, start asking those questions when people tell you something that they think or say works in the garden. The other big question about this, besides the first health and environmental effects, is the cost of it. What is the cost of doing something like this? Something like X-Lax is not a cheap product, and it's probably more expensive than a lot of the things you might do for trapping or other ways to work on chipmunks and moles and getting them out of the garden. A lot of these things claim results. Beautiful blooms, bountiful harvest, least amount of work. Basically, there are no miracle cures. Like your mom and your grandma said, if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. So make sure we're looking at things that are research-based, land-grant universities like Ohio State, Purdue, Cornell, all of our neighboring states. If it's extension approved, then it is research-based. There are some opportunities here, though. If you're interested in your group of doing some basic research, we could work on some protocols with you to see if a practice does in fact work. We know we always need more research done. There's always new things that we can work on. So trying to follow that mission of science-based or research-based information. So back to kind of talking about our organic things. And what reminded me of this recently is I got a question about someone who bought potting mix to put on their vegetable garden and realized after they did it, they didn't wear gloves, didn't wear a mask, that guano, bat guano, which is bat feces, was part of the mix, and they freaked out about it. And they're like, well, this said it was organic. Why does it have this in it? So I had to answer a lot of those questions. So just because it's organic doesn't mean that it's necessarily the best thing for us. So we need to look at that natural, synthetic, conventional versus organic and really understand it a little better. So the better question is, what is not a chemical? LD50 means the lethal dose that kills half the population. Organic or man-made, remember, too much is never a good thing. That's our biggest thing. When we take calls from the public, we get a lot of calls of, well, I can put twice as much on, right? No, you cannot put twice as much on. The label is the label. There may be issues with a chemical, no matter if it's natural or synthetic. We really need to think about that. We have one organic insecticide that it's labeled organic. Organic farmers use it, but it's really toxic to bees. So we need to think about what are all the things that we need to be doing. Why are we using this product? And does it affect anything that we want to make sure we're protecting ourselves? So just thinking about what those are. It's important to know the properties like the toxicity, environmental persistence, things like imidacloprid, that some people don't realize that that product gets into the plant, and thus the pollen has a potential of making our bees sick. So there's lots of things to think about with organic and conventional that we need to understand better in order to answer questions from folks. So our first category of items will be coffee grounds. I get this question all the time. Coffee grounds are the best thing. I can get them from my local coffee shop. But yes, they are good in some ways. It adds nitrogen. There's protein from the bean. That adds to the compost pile. That's a good thing. Never put more than 20% in your compost pile because we want that carbon and nitrogen ratio in there to make sure we can get it to heat up and be the compost product that we want at the end. A lot of people do this, though, because they think it's acidic. Well, no, there's research out there when it comes to coffee grounds. The problem is it's going through the water in your home. McDonald's might be using distilled water to keep their taste the same across the board, but at our houses, a lot of the water coming out of your tap is a very high pH. So as we look at a product like a bean that could be a lower pH, once we put that water through it, that lime in the water, the pH of that water is going to change the pH of those grounds. So what's the pH of your tap water? Some use distilled water. Either way, we really need to make it just part of the compost pile. In research, it does appear that coffee grounds do suppress some fungal rots and wilts. But remember, it doesn't cure, it doesn't fix, it suppresses. But how would you put that on? How would you grind that up to make sure it's going to be a suppressible kind of thing? That's very difficult to do. It does have positive and negative effects on plant growth. And then I get a lot of folks that put it just around the plant instead of putting in the compost. Really not a good idea because of those positive and negative effects, but also because it forms a mat that when it really dries out, it's hard to re-wet. So when we get short rains, quick rains in the summertime, your roots or your plants are not getting water. The last question I got recently was, does it keep cats away? And the answer is definitely no. On to keeping on soil, I get those questions about pennies and nails, whether it's around tomatoes or hydrangeas. No, it's all about the pH of the soil and how to pull that pH up to where it needs to be or push it down to where it needs to be. Whether it's blueberries too is another one I hear a lot about because it's a really low pH soil is what you need to grow good blueberries. Sulfur is better, and that's our most preferred thing at this time to reduce pH. Sometimes it's hard to get a hold of. A lot of your smaller local garden centers will carry that, and it's available online. A nail with a tomato, usually that's only for cutworms because a cutworm will encircle around the stem and then cut the plant off. That's where the name comes from. Nails are not necessary. You can use paper collars, things like that. And then even a trap crop. So when we talk about those organic things that a lot of our urban farmers want to do, a lot of our gardeners want to do, think of things like trap crops. It's a great way. So sunflowers, for example, are a trap crop that will pull those insects away, the cutworms from the tomatoes, and you might not have as much of a problem. So that's something we need to look at and utilize more. eggshells all the time, mostly calcium kind of issues. So what I get is eggshells are calcium, calcium's lime, not exactly equal, but close enough, high pH. So they think if you put a ton on, we're going to push the pH up. Yes, that could possibly happen. I hear about it for slug control. As the bug doc, Dave Shetler, says, and he has pictures of, a slug can crawl across a razor blade and not be injured. So eggshells are not going to be that sharp. So that does not work. Many sites that talk about using this talk about using a coffee grinder or a food processor. I'm not sure if I want my coffee to taste like eggshells or calcium in any way. So think about that. For planting with tomatoes, I get this a lot because of blossom end rot. Blossom end rot is not a disease, it's a disorder. The bottom of the tomato turns black and hard. What happens is the plant, when it gets to that second fruit, it forgets about where to take up calcium if it has not had enough water in the soil. So if you're not giving your tomatoes a minimum of 1 inch per week, when you have big tomatoes on closer to 2 inches per week or more, that plant forgets for a point in time how to move calcium. So what it does is it robs calcium from the cell walls in the blossom end of that first tomato set, and then takes that calcium and puts it on the next fruit set. So you can't really just put on eggs. Eggshells, it doesn't break down fast enough. The bigger thing there for a home gardener, there are sprays for foliar calcium, but the best thing is know what to do and when to water. So this month of May, if people had their tomatoes out early, we had a really hot week there. And in Northeast Ohio, at least, we didn't have rain for over a week. If you didn't water during that time, you're definitely going to have blossom end rot. Putting ashes on the garden is a big one I got. One of my recent callers, we had all these issues, and I kept asking her what she was doing, and she finally said, well, I put my wood furnace ashes on the garden. And I said, well, how much of it do you put on? And she said, all of it. So I just thought that was really interesting. And so we figured out that she's going to go ahead and do her soil test, and we're going to figure out what needs done based on that soil test. So wood ashes contain about 1% phosphorus, 5% potassium, and small amounts of other elements. So it is good in that manner, but the challenge is going to be potassium combines with soil water, and it makes this alkaline substance called lye. And basically, it's like lime, and it raises the pH. So 2 pounds of wood ash is going to be like one pound of lime in the soil. So it's good if we were back in the 80s and we still had all that sulfur going into the air from burning coal, then this might be something that you would do to counteract the acid rain that's happening. But that doesn't happen anymore. Our rain is not as acidic as it was back then because we're not burning coal. In general, though, if you do need it or want to know how much to use, not more than 5 pounds per year per 100 square foot. So that's a 10 by 10 area. And really think about what do you really need it for. Epsom salts. My sister's mother-in-law thought Epsom salts cured the world, and a lot of us still think that. But where this myth comes from when it comes to really tomatoes. So it's a magnesium deficiency. It's naturally occurring in light sandy soils. So if you have sandy soils, it could be an issue. Most of us do not. So when I get soil tests back here in Northeast Ohio, the calcium and magnesium is always through the roof. It's because that's just the way it is in our native soils. We don't really need it. So Epsom salts are a waste of money. You really should just be soaking your feet in those with some other essential oils when you get out of the garden there. If you do have an issue and you see something like intervenochlorosis and older leaves, then you might double check that your soil does have adequate amounts of magnesium, especially if you have light soils. Make sure you do a soil test and know, and different kind of lime products also have magnesium in them, and we use those on low magnesium soils. So off of soils and onto sanitation. First big one here is suckering and tagging tomatoes. So do you really need to do it? What are those things? For years, we've been saying you have to do this, you have to do this. but what is the science behind you must tie them up or sucker them? So first, tying, definitely keeping the plants up off the ground. Air and sunlight penetration through that canopy is going to dry those leaves off faster in the morning. It's going to prevent those fungal pathogens from getting a stronghold on that plant. Plus, it's easier to harvest when you're not having this just big vine. You actually have something that's tied up and has a structure to it. Pruning or suckering, a lot of you might call it pruning. A lot of us older fashioned folks will call it suckering. It's plant structure and health. It's increasing the quick yield, not necessarily a bigger yield, but a bigger tomato possibly, and getting those plants to produce faster. So many heirlooms though too, I get a lot of questions about this. Many heirlooms throw more branches. So you'll have a lot of very dense vine there. So we're reducing the number of those branches to get that airflow through that plant and to dry off those leaves more quickly in the morning. Make sure you give tomatoes space. That's our biggest problem. When it comes to other things like this, concoctions for cut flowers, I get people that mix wine and aspirin. I'm like, oh, those are things for the end of the day, not for, working in the garden and getting those cut flowers inside. The floral preservatives have a different mixture. You're better off getting what is available on the market. But even more so than that, and putting something in the water, make sure you do these things. Sanitize the vases, no leaves below the water, change the water often, recut stems so it doesn't get clogged with anything that's in the water, and then harden those off by putting them in a warm water and in a cool place. So if a cool area, those flowers are going to last longer inside the home. Bleaching tools. So sanitation, I know, is a big thing right now during this pandemic. So what's available out there and what should we be doing? This is another one of those chemical things that people are not necessarily afraid of bleach, but it is very caustic. It can cause issues. If you mix it with the wrong thing, there can be some gas that is produced. So think about following the label. And most use too much. And so you're going to get corrosion. You're going to get the powder of the chlorine that's going to end up being on those pruners, those other tools. So think about this. 1 teaspoon per gallon of water is plenty, but do you really want to use bleach? Like I said, it's corrosive. Your gardening clothes are now ruined. It's corrosive to those metal tools that you're trying to kill things on. It has minimal residual power if you're putting, like, let's say, a dirty pair of pruners into this to dip to sanitize it. You really have to go back to what you'd think of a restaurant as wash, rinse, and sanitize. So you're actually sanitizing something here. So you have to get all that organic matter off of it. If you put something that has a bunch of organic matter into the solution, it takes a lot of that working power away from that bleach. To clean tools, wash, rinse, and sanitize. Listerine, Lysol, Pine Sol, wipes will work, any of that kind of stuff, rubbing alcohol. But more so, you really don't need this that often. Really, bacterial diseases is the thing that I see. Bacterial diseases in tomatoes and bacterial diseases when it comes to apples and pears. So fire blight, for example, is one that I would definitely sanitize after I cut into a branch that I knew had fire blight. Watering. Don't you love all the commercials right now? And the person is holding the wand and watering the leaves of the plant. Well, the leaves of the plant aren't what we're worried about. We're worried about the roots getting water. So we want to really focus in watering on watering the roots. So this picture on the right on your screen, this has become more and more popular. This is that water sack around a tree that's going to deliver a very deep watering to the root system. So we're not encouraging roots just in the top inch or two of soil. We're encouraging those roots to go deep and to take advantage of the situation they're in. So these things are a great way. We want to duplicate this kind of thing in the vegetable garden and in the landscape. So think about why you're adding water. Is there a wilting plant? Or is there something else going on? Maybe a root rot that you don't know about that you need to think about? Is it low soil moisture? Make sure it's consistent moisture. And then an unsteady rainfall, especially in the summer, like we talked with tomatoes, you got to get at least 1 inch of water per week. When do we water? Morning, afternoon? You know, traditionally we've talked about morning, morning, morning. And that thinking is really because if you put that water on in the morning, the plant has a chance for those leaves to dry off, and they're not going to go into the overnight with wet leaves where fungal pathogens can take hold. The afternoon is great, and it actually, some of the research says this is the best time we can water. Now, there are some things like if you have plastic mulch, you don't want to do that. But if you're watering in the garden and you can guarantee water delivery, you know, under the mulch, against the ground, to the roots, then you're definitely going to want the afternoon. That plant's really going to use that water effectively that way. Make sure we know how to water, and that's really at the root zone. Whether it's soaker hoses or anything else you can use, those will be a big help. On to other disease issues, baking soda, sodium bicarbonate. Big question. I have a lot of people that say this is the cure-all. This is the organic person's best friend. You really have to be careful when you hear that from somebody, because this product does not kill fungi. It does not. It will, though, the research says, inhibit fungal growth. So that's suppression. Again, not killing, that's suppression. It's not very practical. It's one of those things that you put it on, it washes off very quickly. You're going to need a lot. And depending on how you mix it and how you put it together, what you add with it, to put a sticker with it, you can basically cover the leaf enough that it becomes phytotoxic to the plant. So you're counteracting what you really want to do to that plant to save it or prevent it from getting a fungal pathogen. You're providing, you know, reducing the amount of sunlight that you can get into that leaf. There's a lot of research out there if you're really interested in this one. Ken Horst at Cornell, he's talking about black spot on roses. And what he says is 3 to 4 days, you'd have a solution of water and a sticker, or you'd call it insecticidal soap that'll hold it on there. And then a 0.5% solution is most effective. That becomes where the challenge is how do you make sure you have a 0.5% solution? I would rather you stick to air and sunlight and do a little extra pruning. Okay, a few more things here. Propagation. When it comes to propagation, I get questions like this. Can I start a rose and a potato? And I often say, why would you want to do that? I mean, is it a science experiment? If it's something to work with the kids, great. That's a good idea to show them carbohydrates and water, moisture. We can get roots to grow. But if you don't have time and you want to just propagate that plant, think about what are the things we can do. So besides doing this, you know, basically to get that plant to start growing some, or that cutting to start growing some roots, there are other things we can do that are normal production or propagation practices. Think about when you propagate, is this easy? Is it more difficult? Can I do layering? There's lots of different opportunities to do something. Usually it's a little simpler than using a potato to start that rose in. Another common one is cover a plant with a quart jar, get it to grow. Well, this does work. It does work. The challenge is most of us, depending on where we're doing this, in the house, outside, if we're not paying attention to it, you're going to fry that plant pretty quickly if it's got any direct sunlight. So basically this is high humidity. That's going to encourage that plant to form roots. Keep those cuttings under glass or plastic bags. Now, plastic bags is generally one when we do leaf cuttings and things. Those do work well. Again, shield from direct sunlight is the biggest challenge there. Make sure you check that medium moisture every few days. The biggest thing with propagation I see is where we're doing something where we're just dying to pick that cutting up and look at the bottom and see if some roots are forming. We need to resist that temptation if we're trying to do this. Just make sure that the medium is moist and leave it alone until you think, it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on what your literature you're reading, that plant will eventually have roots for you. Depending on what plant you're using, it can take a few days or even several months. And again, tug that a little bit. The resistance is when you'll know that there are, in fact, roots growing on there. Soaking seeds. This is a big one. In the spring, people want to really get crops to move along faster in the vegetable garden. Or if you grow lab or a purple hyacinth bean vine, that works really well for that plant. It can take 3 weeks to come up if you just plant it in the ground, but if you soak it, a couple of days and away you go. So we say eureka. Well, kind of. So this isn't perfect. It's not the same for every seed. It's different for everything you might think of. But basically, seeds have to absorb water. So if you've ever had a challenge with growing pumpkins or any kind of a big seed, it's that seed to soil contact that we're talking about here. That the seed is completely covered up, that the moisture in the ground is nice. It's not soaking wet, but you have enough water there that that seed can swell and send that root radical down and that first set of cotyledons up to get leaves going and get the plant moving. So that's what we're really talking about, is seed to soil contact, and increasing that or decreasing the time it takes to get the plant to emerge. So don't soak treated seed if it's colored at all. One night for corn, overnight for okra. If you work on this and you soak things too long, you can make things crack. A lot of beans will crack on you. If moisture is present, make sure you plant shallow. Cool soils will be a detriment for you if you're trying to get those to happen. And then again, there for beans, never soak those bean seeds, depending on what that is, because a lot of times you're going to make those crack. Weed control, our favorite thing now that we've got things planted, we're seeing lots of weeds come up. So let's talk about some things like mulch. I get lots of questions about seed, about termites, weed seed. Know the source of your mulch. Where's your mulch coming from? Is it coming from a reputable landscaper? The double ground you're getting a lot of times from them, it's not going to have weed seeds in it. And if you're also, a lot of our more urban populations now, we're getting free mulch from tree trimming companies, and generally that's not going to have weed seeds as well. So you're not going to have an issue. You're more likely to get an issue with weeds if you're using manure or improperly composted manure that you're getting somewhere. Termites, this hasn't come up for a while now, but I always like to remind people of this. There's always a question about this in years where we have a large destructive hurricane and people claim they're getting a bunch of mulch from the south. Termites will rarely survive chipping. They won't survive away from the colony, and usually that's not their diet. So it's improbable that would ever happen. Think about things like bark mulch. A lot of folks want to use the big pine bark mulch. A lot of those are really shiny. And if you think about that, that can repel water depending on what you're using it for. Wood chips definitely have a better water holding capacity. Landscape cloth. Some people love it, some people hate it. I'm in the case of, I don't need it. I'm still digging out. This is our 8th year in Canfield, Ohio, and I'm still digging out stuff that's 4 inches under the soil. So usually it's for those with a lot of mulch and a few shrubs, or if you're actually going to put gravel on and you want to keep that gravel from sinking down into the soil. But even if you're putting gravel on, you really need to use the leaf blower and blow out debris at least once a month during the season and really work on getting all the leaves out of that. Otherwise, those are breaking down, forming more organic matter, and then just covering it up. It will only rot on the edges or in pieces and come out in pieces, but more of it is that we're getting other mulch, dust, and debris gets on top of that, and eventually that composts over time and becomes organic matter, and then you're adding more. So the landscape cloth moves down to 4 inches below the soil, and now weed seeds germinate in that nice cushy soil on top of it. Rubber mulch and other synthetics, those tend to be challenges. How do you keep it in place? What's the environmental impact? So think about those before you try those. Organic mulches, though, are your best bet. We get a lot of questions about organic weed control. Preen does have an organic vegetable control out there now, but the biggest thing I get questions about is corn gluten meal on lawns. It is a protein-based. It has pre-emergent control. It's not really effective on established weeds at all. There's nothing. It's not selective, so it's not going to inhibit just the plants you don't want. It's going to plant, like if you wanted to put new grass seed down, it's going to inhibit that as well. It's most beneficial in lawns. It has to build up in the soil over time for things like crabgrass, but you'll literally need a ton for your lawn. So there are some possibilities here, but make sure you know what you're getting into with corn gluten meal. Newspapers are something I prefer. This is one place where Linda, Scott, and I kind of disagree. We use a lot of newspapers, and it really works well in Youngstown in our urban community gardens. We want to make sure, though, that no edges are sticking up. So just like when you have like a container, you bought a tomato plant, and it's in a recyclable container that's going to break down, you want to rip the top of that container off or make sure it's not sticking above the ground because it can wick moisture away from the root ball. So newspapers can do the same thing. Heavy colors or magazines may contain heavy metals, but usually this is not a considerable issue anymore because it's not made out of heavy metals. Most of this is all soybean ink now. We say 2 to 4 layers thick or shredded. I have some more experienced master gardeners have a hard time getting around sometimes. So what they do is right before a rain, like as long as you know it wasn't a storm like today, they go out in the garden and spread over shredded paper and then let that rain kind of make it into paper mache. And that's really going to help you with some weed control and to hold some moisture in. Vinegar is a popular thing we hear about. Vinegar does kill weeds, but it also kills everything it's sprayed on. So if you were going to use vinegar, and it's that acid really that breaks down the cell walls and takes away that, like the oils off the plant leaf, that's what causes that burn is the acid, the 5% acetic acid that's in what you get off the shelf in the grocery store. It would drift over onto your roses. It would drift over onto your lawn. So just like any other chemical, and that's why we talked about chemicals at the beginning, just because vinegar is organic, I don't want you to think it's safe. We can buy very high concentrated organic vinegar for weed control, and we really need to be careful when we're using that because it can burn skin. Environmentally friendly but expensive. Cornell has some great research out there. They use that 5% vinegar off the shelf. It was ineffective in short term because it's not going to kill the root. It's only going to burn the plant, parts of the plant that are above ground. 3 applications were much better. It does work good on crabgrass and plantain. Generally, it's lots of applications. USDA has some other research, 10 to 20% concentration. It has 80 to 100% control of annuals. So that's good. And that's usually small annuals that's going to work on. You're taking away that plant's capability to form roots when you're looking at an annual or keep the roots alive because you're killing the top of the plant. And then it has to use the carbohydrates in those roots to try to releaf again. Perennial weeds like Canada thistle, their findings were 5% vinegar, which is what you get in the store. You will burn down 100% of the shoots on top of the ground, but you will not touch the roots. And literally, you would probably be 40 or 50 sprays of this before you would be able to deplete all the carbohydrates out of roots of something like Canada thistle. It's very difficult to do. I hear about salt to kill weeds. This is the exact quote here. Drop a small pinch of table salt at the base of the undesirable plants. It'll kill the plant and dilute down to harmless in the next few rainfalls. Well, this is not true. Deep-rooted plants have a higher sodium tolerance. So if you try to do this, something like a pokeweed, you're not going to touch it. It's not going to happen. So that's why things like asparagus are more tolerant, but also because they're from the Mediterranean natively. So they're used to a little bit of salt. It does affect soil structure, inhibits water penetration through the soil, so it can become a soil issue because it leaches out into other areas of your garden. Insects and wildlife. Here's the thing, if you live in Ohio, you have peonies right now. Every peony plant probably has an ant on it. So thus, that's why the old wives' tale got spread so much. Really, it was old husband's tale, that ants, you have to have the ants to make sure a peony blooms. It's not true. They're really attracted to the sweet nectar there. And so that sugary liquid is secreted by the flower buds. They love it. And then they're there and they're going to eat and chew away. I have so many. They're not going to destroy any flowers, but they're going to just thrive in that area. But I have heard a couple folks asking, well, I use black pepper and it really works. Well, something else is working. It's not the black pepper. Say that for the baked potato. But what might be working is maybe you put ant traps out in a certain year, or you put something else out, or something happened to the nest of the ants that they were diminished in some way. But black pepper doesn't work, and they're not required to pollinate one of those peonies. A lot of insecticidal soap things out there. Insecticidal soap is a great product. It's an organic product we can use. It controls a lot of our soft-bodied insects, so it's good stuff. The challenge becomes is that some people think any soap will do. Well, Dawn takes grease, right, out of your way. So that's going to take a lot of the natural oils that protect those leaves off, and then it can be phytotoxic to the plant. The other big one is palm olive. If you think of Marge, for those of us in the older generations, palm olive softens your hands while you do dishes. Again, it must have a lotion in it, and that lotion then also becomes phytotoxic on those plants. So think about what you're doing. Make sure you use an actual, it's not that expensive to buy a true insecticidal soap. You don't need very much. You can share it with a fellow gardener, split a bottle if you needed to. But know also that if it's above 90 degrees, you can cause plant issues with it as well. But it's a 2% concentration. Just follow the label, and it does a lot of good things. Slugs, like we talked about earlier, they produce enough slime, like we said with eggs. But the real thing here is reducing the population of slugs. It is fun, to watch them kind of curl up and die when you put salt on them. But again, that's not good for our soil. None of this stuff really works. What we've really done in a lot of our urban settings to reduce these populations of slugs, especially in wet years, is pieces of cardboard. So around those hostas, putting down pieces of cardboard, come out the next morning, pull that up. The bottom of that cardboard is covered with slugs. Throw that, excuse me, throw it away, and then get another piece of cardboard. So reduce the population by attracting them to that wet area under a piece of cardboard or other piece of paper. And on. We could go on forever with all these different things. I've heard marigolds keep rabbits, but maybe the neighbor got a new dog. Maybe there's a coyote that's coming closer. There's another reason. It's not just marigolds that suddenly the bunnies have decided not to bother your vegetable garden. Moles and voles, bubble gum is a real popular one. Alka-Seltzer, none of those works. None of those are labeled for that product, for that kind of a thing. I've heard spread salt around the house to get rid of insects. I've heard the cinnamon to get rid of ants. There are some things to some of these, but most of them do not work. Garlic on roses. One year when I was in the Washington County office, we decided we're going to we got a large donation of spices we didn't need, and they thought we could use them on plants, and we said, let's try this. So for the whole season, it smelled like a pizza factory in front of our office. The roses got a constant application every time it rained, every time it was super hot, and we still had rose slugs and all kinds of issues with our roses. So for us, that did not work. Some of these things change. There are, Dave Shetler and I were talking this week about another issue, and when it comes to mosquitoes, for example, it's garlic oil is one of the main ingredients in something we're using more and more for mosquitoes. And that garlic oil actually does affect the mosquito with the other ingredients in that product. So we can look for more of that, and hopefully that's going to be something that's going to help us as mosquito season gets worse here. A few more before we finish up. Drainage material in pots. I've always been told, or else I felt like I was told, that you just throw a bunch of stuff in the bottom of the pot, and that'll make the pot lighter, whether it's crushed up or crushed aluminum cans, whether it's rock. We got to get good drainage in that container. A lot of research has been done on this, and some of the research says that it retards that water flow. So really, and it reduces our water holding capacity of our soil. I think that's the real thing here. If you have a big pot, you want the plant roots to be able to get down in there. Now, if you have a 100-gallon pot that's gigantic, that might be different. But the solution here is really potting mix and not potting soil that makes containers heavy. So potting mix is really light. It really doesn't have any minerals in it. It's not going to hold on to nutrients. But potting soil that's going to be a heavier product. So if you're really looking, it's really probably the weight that most people are thinking about when they're talking about drainage in these containers. When it comes to poison ivy, as we talked about mulch, I get a lot of that. I could get poison ivy from if they cut down trees and shredded those up. That's probably unlikely because a crew that's out cutting trees out of electric lines is probably not going to chop up any poison ivy themselves. They don't want to get it. They know it can be transferred through the air in those situations, and then they can touch that oil, can be spread, that urushiol in lots of ways. So basically, you have to have direct contact with the urushiol or contact from smoke from burning plants. So, and I really thought this was interesting. Urushiol remains active on a surface, including dead plants, for up to 5 years. So just because a poison ivy vine is dead does not mean, and maybe it's dead for a long time, it doesn't mean that it's not potential to give you poison ivy. But you're not going to get it from rubbing up against someone that does have poison ivy themselves. Aluminum pie plates for bird control, things like that. You know, I even have a lot of, old DVDs. Those will work. Kind of, but more than likely you're better off doing things like stretching fishing line, the phony owls. But you gotta, whatever you do, you gotta mix it up. Wildlife are smart. They figure things out over time. So move those devices to new locations, change it up, do different things, and employ lots of different control options if you have bird issues or other wildlife issues. The biggest thing is probably, why did my tree die? There's so many things we do to trees to kill them. A couple years ago when I moved to Youngstown, I had the opportunity to talk to a large group, a big men's garden club. And the gentleman before me was a realtor. And he basically stood up in front of the group and said, if you're going to redo your home and have a construction crew in, cut all the trees out of your yard to make it more sellable, and then plant whatever you want back after your construction's done. And I got up and I just had to say, I completely disagree with what was just said. I said, put up a fence around your trees and save them. Don't let those construction crews park on top of the roots. That's what the issue becomes if you're going to have tree issues, is we drive and we park under them because they want to park in the shade. So we also over fertilize, and there's this whole list. If you really want to look this up, it's Dr. Alex Shigo, S-H-I-G-O. He's an USDA Forest Service pathologist, retired. But he goes through all the different things we do to basically kill trees, including the mulch volcanoes that we love to talk about, that people bury basically the trunk of that tree where we have a nice root flare. Make sure you know your stuff like integrated pest management. It's really this disease triangle, and it's why I talk about air and sunlight so much, to try to reduce disease infection in the garden. You have to have the host. Let's say it's a tomato plant. The pathogen is early blight. The environment. If we're planting plants close together, that's the environment. We're making this plant live in an area where it doesn't have enough airflow. It's not maybe tied up. It doesn't have sunlight penetration. It's not 100% full sun where it needs to be. That's the part of the triangle we can change as home gardeners to help people to not have some of these disease issues. Research-based approaches, prevention, suppression, and eradication, that we're really looking at IPM detecting. So we're monitoring for that insect disease. We're identifying that it is in fact a bad thing, or that the level is high enough. We have a lot of threshold treatments. So if we have one cucumber beetle, maybe it's not much of a problem. But once we get 3 or 4, maybe that becomes an issue. So we need to know what those levels are. That's why we have to identify the insect. When we go to search, looking at like Google, for example, or what a Safari, whatever your search engine is, use the right term. If we just put in apple diseases, we would get grandma's backyard garden. Or maybe Pam has a secret identity that she has a website and she gives out bad information. Who knows, right? But if you put apple diseases and then add extension or university extension like this, then you're going to get this list of fact sheets that good people like Pam, Denise are writing out there across the country to say, here's the issue with apple diseases. Here's what it could be. Here's whether it's a bacterial disease, a virus, a fungal pathogen, whatever it is. And we don't care if it's from Clemson here, Minnesota, as long as it's from a land-grant university that is using and publishing fact sheets. We don't want you to go out there and pull off some information that is not research-based. I really push a lot is these disease issues, air and sunlight. So it's amazing when you plant a plant where it wants to grow. So the hosta cannot go out at the end of the driveway in full sun around the mailbox. It's not where it wants to grow, right? It needs shade. You help it with a little water when it needs it, something like a tomato that you're making sure it's a minimum of 1 inch of water per week. You give it that amount of light or shade that it needs. You work with the natural environment to save extra labor by fighting what comes naturally. When plants are grown where they're meant to be, it's a lot easier to be a great gardener. Know how to search. Make sure you can use Ask a Master Gardener, ask an expert. It is so important. Promote our clinics in our counties. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You can also go to Dr. Chalker Scott's webpage. It's theinformedgardener.com. She has lots of things like we talked about today and a lot more detail. Don't forget, it's research-based. It's why we have land-grant institutions. There is opportunities, like I said at the beginning, for Master Gardener volunteer research. So if you wanted to try some things and see if they really do work, we would work with you on some research. Do your part to dispel myths and legends. You know, do presentations like this to other groups, questions and answers and newsletters. The big one we get all the time is, you know, this weed control concoction on Facebook that is soap and salt and all this other stuff put together. It really doesn't work. And why doesn't it work? Doing some sessions at Master Gardener events, activities, challenge other Master Gardeners in your county to even work on some research so we can all learn something new. And also on this, I will have Denise post this where she's posted the handout that you can see some other information that we've shared to put the presentation together. Okay, we'll go to some of your questions here.
All right, Eric, did you say you would provide a PDF of your PowerPoint file for us?
Yep, absolutely.
Great, great.
If you actually Google it, you'll find it as well.
Great. So if everybody would check back, we'll have that put on the site where you registered and have that available for you. Carolyn Hufford says, I've heard these tree watering bags promote growth of roots above flare and aren't recommended. Can you address this?
So this is not something you want to do long term. I think when it comes to trees, I would probably defer to one of our other plant experts. Of long term, I've not looked at long term use of them, but I would suspect that that's what they're talking about. I would almost guess that there's too much mulch, and then there's a bag of water above that, and that's why you're getting some roots growing above, you know, adventitious buds that are turning into roots, and then stem girdling roots and lots of issues. But this is like the best thing when it comes to trying to water a newly planted tree in a hot, dry year. Do you need it? What can you do? If you don't feel comfortable using like a water bag, a 5-gallon bucket does work really well, but with just one hole in the bottom, not a bunch of holes. A lot of folks want to put a bunch of holes, drain it, it drains too fast. So if you didn't want to use a bag, or if you couldn't afford to buy a bag, a 5-gallon bucket with just one hole would work well. But we can look into what's happening long term. I've not heard anything about that.
So Eric, would you agree that some people tend to think of these as a crutch and forget that they still have to water periodically?
Yep. Or they do it once and think that's enough. Or they do it once and then think, oh, I can go back in 2 weeks and do it again and I'm good. So anytime you're planting a new plant of any kind, you got to make sure, like we talked about tomatoes, that minimum of 1 inch per week is a good guideline, and even more so depending on how big the plant is.
Yeah, good reminder. What is the best organic method to get rid of an ant's nest in a flower garden?
I'm still working on that one. We don't use a lot of those ant baits in our lawn because we have 2 little ones. I have not seen a good way to do that organically. So the jury's still out. There are some good fact sheets out there, but most of them talk about bait.
Okay. What is an effective mole remover?
So, you know, we argue about this question all the time, right, Pam?
Yeah.
there's no great answer. The traps are probably the best. They're also not 100% effective. We get lots of folks that say, well, grub control, right? It's all about grub control. Well, no, because they eat earthworms. So, you know, it's trying to balance what you can in that environment, pulling out and reading every piece of material you come up with. So doing what we talked about with the search of mold control, university extension, but the trapping seems to be the only thing that's consistently effective.
Yeah, if you would ask my father, he says trapping, but he also says it's exciting and it's the thrill of the hunt for him. He will go out and actually watch them. And he keeps telling me, you really should do this. And I'm like, Dad, I don't, because he will be very patient. He'll watch the holes, he'll watch the runs pop back up, and he'll put his shovel in there and his pitchfork. But it takes a lot of time. And Eric's right. We go back and forth. There is no one surefire way on this. Are wool pellets or coarse sand effective on slugs?
So what kind of pellets?
Wool pellets.
Not that I know of. I've not heard of the wool pellets before. Sand, no.
I think I always go with what Dave Shetler says, you know, like the diatomaceous earth and those things, they secrete so much mucus that those coarse things don't bother them. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I think we go back to our community gardeners. We consistently use like 1x1 squares of cardboard. So during the pandemic, I'm sure you've got lots of deliveries at the house. Cut all those boxes into squares, pull the mulch away from underneath hostas and other plants that are touching the ground, lay those down. It's moist during the night. You can even water if you want. You pick that up and it's covered. So it's all about reducing the populations. That's one of the things you can do. If you're like if you do grow hostas, think about buying ones that are more vase shaped, that aren't so low to the ground, that don't have leaves that flop clear to the ground, where they're going to be able to get on there easier. A slug can make more damage. Think about all that mixture of things. But I think your best thing is reducing the population by using something like cardboard. It's a little bit of work, but it's not as much work as trying to watch all those moles and trying to get rid of them by doing the thrill of the hunt.
Kim wants to know if Sluggo, which contains the iron metaldehyde, will that kill slugs?
I would have to look that one up.
Yes, it does. It's one of the recommended for herbaceous. Yeah, it does a great job. Oh, okay, Eric. So this is going to tell us that we're too young because apparently wool pellets are mothballs. Did you know that?
Oh, no.
I had no idea. Thank you, Carolyn Hubbard, for adding that. I did not know that that was called wool pellets. Kim Whitehead says she likes your background photo. And Catherine Skinner wants to know if you can add sulfur to any color hydrangea to make it blue. Funny she should ask about hydrangeas, huh?
Funny that we talked about, you know, I got a new bag of sulfur. I had to get it for curbside pickup. So, you know, it's all about, so yes, technically any macrophylla or serrata, which is the two types that we can grow here that will change color, will turn pink or blue. So high pH pink, low pH blue. You need fast-acting sulfur. Any kind of soil sulfur will work. It's not like lime. So lime is going to interact with the soil throughout the year. Sulfur, the microbes in the soil have to break the sulfur down to sulfuric acid, which reduces the pH. So you really have to work on that to get blue. I'm getting some serious blues now, finally. I think 3 years that I've been trying to pull that pH down, you know, without freaking out about it. One thing you can do, and there are a lot of fact sheets out there, and I think on Eric Draper's blueberry fact sheet, it talks about how much peat moss, to like an inch of peat moss, will reduce the pH 1 point for the season. It's not going to be as long term. You can do that when you plant, but then you can't do that consistently every year. So,
yeah.
But again, it's macrophylla and serrata. The rest of them will not change color.
And a couple things, Eric, in our area, we are on such a high calcium base that even if we would, down in Southwest Ohio, clay soils, even if we would change the pH one year, it's going to be a constant process for us. But you are a little bit different up in your area, correct, in terms of your soil?
Yes, so we're different, that our pH is probably naturally around 6.
Oh, geez.
Southeast Ohio isn't going to be as bad. They're going to be a little lower than that in a lot of the wooded areas, but I still have to fight mine. So your soils always want to get back to what it naturally is, because you're just changing the pH in a 10-foot square area, probably in most cases a 4 to 5 foot square area. So naturally the soil around there is still interacting with the soil you change the pH in. So you're going to have to be working on it all the time. So you're going to want to do a soil test every 2 to 3 years, but you can do a pH test, and there's some fact sheets about doing that, and then checking your pH. It's going to be a range instead of an exactness, but you're going to be able to tell, am I within the range, or do I need to put more sulfur on again this year?
So that's interesting, Eric, and I think I want to re-emphasize this. You said your soil pH is around 6.5, and you have to fight keeping your soil pH down to keep those blue. So just keep in mind, folks that are listening and wanting to think about that hydrangea being blue in the southwest part of the state and western part of the state, where we have high calcium and high pH, 7.3 sometimes. If he's fighting it up there, think about what we have to do and the amount that would have to be added. So that's really a real good point, Eric.
So every fall, I'm pulling my mulch back and putting about a quarter cup of sulfur within the drip line, and then going again for the next year.
Yeah, so. Wow. And the other thing to remind people, his hydrangea talk that he did earlier in the year is on the website down towards the bottom. They're in kind of chronological order from when we started back in March, and you can go to that recording and he talks more about this in detail. I have heard that, I'm sorry?
That question too might have been, the one behind me is pink. This is an oak leaf. A lot of hydrangeas fade to pink, but they will never turn blue. So that's just my note there, to make sure that there are some that will turn pink as they fade, but they will never go blue. Okay.
Here is a good myth for you to address. Myth or fact. I have heard that ants help to deter termites.
I don't know, and I would probably ask Dave Shetlar or Ashley Kohanek, but I will ask that question.
Yeah, and I would suspect that that's probably a myth.
Yep.
That's interesting. We planted a bottle brush buckeye, and the nurseryman said to leave the metal cage and burlap on it when you plant. What is the latest theory on this? Great question.
Weren't we just talking about this? I thought in the email, I just saw something like this on one of the responses. We want to remove as much as we can. Is this the short answer, Pam? I think this is the short answer. Yep. Remove as much as you can that does not affect or let the ball of soil come apart. Right? Yep. So
yeah, we've seen too many problems where either the synthetic burlap and synthetic rope or the wire baskets aren't degrading as they should. Yep. Okay, when is the best time to add sulfur to the soil for blackberries? I understand soil temperatures need to be above 55.
So you can add it at any point in time. Maybe to clarify what I said earlier. So the microbes that break the sulfur down to sulfuric acid, are soil temperatures going to be in the mid 50s. So it's probably, like this year, that didn't happen until mid-May, late May almost, depending on where you're at in the state. So they're working on that now, and they'll work on that late in the fall. Our warmest soil temperature usually is Labor Day, just because the heat is finally built up. So that's why we still have warmer temperatures probably until closer to Thanksgiving, maybe later, depending on the year. So they only work during those times. That doesn't mean that you can't put it on a different time of year. Like I said, I put mine in the fall and then just cover it up, and I'm like, they'll work on it a little bit until the temperatures get lower, and then they'll come back. Those microbes are more active back again the next spring.
Okay, a couple final questions here to wrap up. Can I use the Ajax dish liquid for insect control?
No.
And do you want to elaborate?
You must buy insecticidal soap. It is not, I get this question a lot as we talked. there's a lot of all natural soaps, or you'll get some, maybe it's a certain brand that you like and it says no additives, none of this. It's still not insecticidal soap that is labeled for our plants, and it will guarantee it's not going to harm our plants if we use it properly. So it's not very expensive. You can get it at a lot of our local garden centers. Just buy regular insecticidal soap and use it till it's gone, or share it with a fellow gardener.
Okay, and also as a reminder, wearing my Master Gardener hat here, if I am out in the public teaching people and I'm acting the capacity of a Master Gardener, remember we cannot recommend anything like that unless it is a labeled pesticide. Soaps and vinegar and salts are not labeled pesticides, and we cannot make those recommendations due to liability issues. So please make sure that you reread that pest management policy so that you're not getting yourself into any kind of trouble. Eric, while I get ready to pull the poll up, would you please go back to the slide for Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott so that they could see that link? And I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll if you folks would answer these questions. And there you go, the web page for Chalker-Scott. And Eric, I have to agree with you. Sometimes her answers are so research-based that people just can't experiment. But she does have great research-based information.
Yep. It's amazing.
Yep. Pat Martin, while we're finishing this up, she added one final question. Watering new tree with a donut water filled, is this okay?
So a donut, so it's just like a inner tube type thing that's around the tree, and then you're watering that once.
Yeah, these are new.
Yep. Yeah, that's fine. I would definitely take it off. You might have rodent damage or something if you leave it on during the winter, but watering during the season is fine. I would have to look up the specific product to see if there's anything else, but I think if you say it's a donut, it probably covers less of the bark than the bags, and it would probably be a good thing.
Okay, a couple more seconds here. Let a few more people answer the poll. Eric, how's that baby doing?
She is doing good. She's actually quiet in the kitchen right now, my wife. But sleeping is not her #1 priority at night.
Oh dear.
So we get some sleep, right? She's learning, and that's what my mom is here. She quarantines herself, so she's up to hold on to the baby for the next couple of days.
Nice. Oh, how nice for a grandma. And how is Clara doing with her new sister?
She loves it, holds her, kisses her. I feel like she's going to be like when Stella's laying on the floor, we do tummy time. She's going to eventually start picking up her shirt and helping her crawl. She wants her to be able to play more. So.
Well, enjoy these times. These are really the best of times as they're starting to grow up. All right, let me share the results of the poll. Eric, 100% of the people learned something new today. 100% plan to incorporate what they learned into their gardening practices. And 47 plus 34 plus 70%, 17% thought it was good, great, and excellent. And then there's just some information on general topics that I asked to kind of help guide us as we plan our continuing education programs in the winter months. So I appreciate you filling those out, and then specific plants that you want to learn about that interest you. Yay on perennials. That's something we can definitely address, but there's some great information that will help us program plan for the next few months. All right, Eric, thank you so much. You did such a fantastic job. Just always enjoy hearing from you. And then take care, everybody. We will see you tomorrow for Lunch and Learn at noon. Bye, everybody.
Have a great night.
You too.